Welcome to the video presentation of my report part B. Through this video, I will be explaining how I implemented the 6 focus areas I prepared in the action plan in my report part A. I will be focusing on the approaches and pedagogical practice I incorporated, how effective this was, the impact on student learning, and some self-evaluation. To briefly describe my own context, I'm an Australian Masters of Education student studying secondary teaching at University of SA. My major learning area, and the one I will focus on today, is in Arts Education, Media Arts, and my minor is in Teaching English to Speakers of Other Languages. This report is written from my experience in my final placement at Valley View Secondary School. It is important to acknowledge that Valley View is a Category 2 school in the northeastern suburbs of Adelaide. There are a large percentage of negotiated education program students at Valley View, and there is a strong focus on student wellbeing and development. The major hurdle teachers face at Valley View is poor student attendance rate, which has become a focus area for the school's site development plan. Majority of my experiences I will discuss are from my Year 8 Media Arts class with some overall school observations. My first focus area point is 1.5, demonstrate knowledge and understanding of strategies for differentiating teaching to meeting the specific learning needs of students across the full range of abilities. Differentiation was a large part of my teaching strategies throughout my 6-week placement at this school. On most occasions, I needed to adjust accordingly for individual students and sometimes on the fly. Using a scaffolding pedagogy supported me to do this in most occasions. For my media arts class, I created a task that was broken into multiple smaller tasks, each one using different skill sets. This gave students the opportunity to move through the task slowly, some excelling in parts and not in others. For the students who had approved NEPs, my mentor teacher and I discussed the elements that could be removed while still maintaining the integrity of learning. This is the example that I will use to show how I acted this plan out. This approach of the scaffolding worked quite well for the Year 8 Media class, as the entire class was capable, but in varying ways. The diagram here that I've placed on this slide shows the 5 elements of the task that I'd scaffolded into the final assignment. There was also 3 key skills needed to excel in student learning for each different task. Taking the last assessment as an example of evidence of impact, which is the radio broadcast down at the bottom, that was only 1/5 of the overall task for this unit. And this is where the main differentiation occurred. Some students were able to complete the speaking part at the top where it says public speaking. They did that by being the host of the show. They were also able to use their radio equipment at the school independently, and they could create responsible content using the media literacy theories that we taught throughout class. Whereas the students that had NEPs, they may not have been able to host the show by talking live for the whole 20 minutes. So instead we decided that they could create a radio DJ set. This meant that they would choose the music that they would play throughout the show, and they'd do that by using their responsible content creation skills. They would have to make sure the songs were appropriate for the audience of the school. They were also able to use the audio equipment, which was the second skill, but with just some teacher assistance. This meant that these students were able to use 2 of the 3 skills required to achieve that part of the 5-part task. The evidence of impact for this strategy was that all students were able to complete and pass this task despite the complexity. I was not able to share the audio recordings of the shows, unfortunately, so therefore this diagram acts as the evidence piece. The next focus area is 2.5, which is know and understand literacy and numeracy teaching strategies and their application in teaching areas. The summary of this plan for using numeracy and literacy teaching strategies in Year 8 Media was to teach the media literacy theory that I've mentioned through making and responding to various radio texts and artworks. Students were able to do this by analysing other radio shows and promotion for these shows and using what they have learned about audiences and intent to create their own radio show. The main pedagogical approach I used for teaching numeracy was based on Dole's discussion of how teachers should be seizing any moments when numeracy skills can be developed. My example of this was our radio run sheets. So the students were required to create a basic run sheet for their show. It needed to last 20 minutes, including a news segment, an advertisement, 2 to 3 songs, and other elements. Each segment needed to be timed and added together to create a total of 20 minutes of show content. The students were all happy to do this and incorporated their numeracy skills into their arts planning. All students were able to create a run sheet like the example above. Even those with NEPs created a run sheet with song times and ensured their show ran for 20 minutes. The next focus area that I'm looking at is 2.6, which is implement teaching strategies for using ICT to expand curriculum learning opportunities for students. My action plan for this focus area was to create a Kahoot quiz based on the documentary we had watched as a class in the previous lesson. I chose this task as it included ICT in a way that students were familiar with, as they'd all done Kahoot before in other classes, and setting the lesson up as a bit of a competitive quiz game. For me as the teacher, this task was a formative assessment to actually see how the students reflected on the messages of the film. Connected learning evidence suggests that middle year students should have a curriculum that is relevant and connected to their own lives, and this was the focus of my pedagogy in this class. This class was, although a bit loud and chatty and the kids were laughing and having a lot of fun, it was a complete success as the students who had generally struggled to get written work from, they were all willing and excited to share their thoughts on the film. I could see the impact of learning when a student would get a reflection question incorrectly. They would dispute the answer, but then their classmates would explain to them why the correct answer was right. So it was a fun game for them, but they were all learning and teaching each other along the way. My action plan for focus area 4.2, which is demonstrate the capacity to organise classroom activities and provide clear directions, was to use creative body-based learning activities in a class that was designed to develop students' abilities to reflect and analyse a text. In this case, it was the same documentary mentioned previously. This was so that I was able to encourage deep learning on the topic. I used the game It Made Me Think as the opening CBL strategy to activate dialogue and encourage students to discuss their perspectives. We threw a ball of yarn around to each other and shared our thoughts on the film we had watched the lesson before. This was the first of a string of activities for the 105-minute lesson that would develop a deeper understanding on the film's messages. I chose this over a simple question and answer worksheet because I knew that my students wouldn't respond to or engage in learning that way. I was really happy with how this class went. It was a Friday afternoon, last lesson of the day, so the students had lots of energy to burn. By having multiple short activities, such as It Made Me Think, the students were able to move around and engage in the learning. The evidence of impact that I observed during this class was when students' attitudes changed from, "Oh, I don't have anything to share about the film," to, "Oh, can I have the ball of yarn? I have something else to say." My evidence for this focus area is just a snippet from my detailed lesson plan outlining all elements of each task. As this was a class where we ran multiple activities, it was important that I was organised and gave clear instructions to keep the class under control. My next focus area is 5.5, demonstrate understanding of a range of strategies for reporting to students and parents or carers and the purpose of keeping accurate and reliable records of student achievement. Valley View Secondary School has a range of pre-prepared strategies for its teachers to report to students and parents or carers in regard to keeping record of student achievements. I wanted to use this time at Valley View to try some of my own approaches to keeping student records. Part of this was done by just keeping my journals each day for my placement, but I also created some tracking documents. And if the process was approved by the school, I would have uploaded these to Daymap for the students and parents to view, but at this time I was just trialling it. These could then be brought up at parent-teacher interviews or throughout the semester for students and their parents to see how they're tracking throughout the year ongoing. Although I wasn't able to share these documents because I didn't go through the process of approvals, I did keep these records for myself on each student in my media art class to keep track of them throughout the unit. This example that I have here shows the 3 achievement standards listed at the top that we were focusing on throughout the radio and media literacy unit. And then below that is the 5 parts of the assessment task. Each task relates to 1 or 2 of the above achievement standards, and the grades were live, so I would change them as students were progressing throughout classwork. Students could then look at their grades that they have for their tasks and see how it correlates to what they're learning in the achievement standards above, and they can really see what I'm assessing them on. My next focus area is 7.3, Understand Strategies for Working Effectively, Sensitively and Confidentially with Parents and Carers. From early on in my placement at Valley View, I was made aware that the largest issue that Valley View faced was attendance, and it was a firm belief that higher attendance rates correlated directly to higher achievement for students in class. For this reason, it's a strong focus for all teachers and staff at Valley View, and there are many processes relating to attendance, which became part of my action plan for focus area 7.3. Communication to parents was the key element of this strategy, and community involvement through parents and carers' support of their students' engagement in school was a pedagogical approach that all staff were encouraged to use. Parents were informed of risk of failing, poor attendance, internal suspensions on every occasion, and it was tracked and reported accurately via DayMap. The evidence piece here is just an example of one of the communications we would send home to parents in regard to a risk of failure specifically for SACE students. And this would have a recommendation for the parent to contact the school and or commit to supporting their child to complete and hand up the tasks supplied. These type of forms became part of my day-to-day work at Valley View. And the impact of learning was quite clear when students would end up actually completing the work and bringing it in after we would do this reporting. So those are the 6 points for my action plan, which I was able to complete over my placement. Looking at evaluating my practice a little bit, I thought a good way to do it would be to look at the 4 key things that I was looking to develop and how I've developed over my placement. So looking at pedagogical approach, before my placement in RP2, it was very theoretical. After RP2, I was able to be more practical in my approaches. Looking to the future, I would like to work on using more CBL strategies, and then a goal would be that I would be able to do more research into pedagogical approaches. I've looked here at my standards, how many I've met, and of my obvious goals of becoming a proficient teacher and then looking towards leadership. Looking at impact on student learning, it was all very anecdotal before I did this 6-week placement, but now I'm finding hard evidence to really be able to show that impact on learning. And I've been able to be more reflexive, and I hope to do more so in the future. My curriculum connections developed a whole lot through this placement. Before RP2, I was just looking at achievement standards and how to meet those. After RP2, I really understood that there needed to be a strong focus on literacy and numeracy, even as an arts teacher. Looking towards my future, I would like to include more Aboriginal education and connections to Asia, and a goal being to work in more teaching teams. On a bit of a personal note, my aim from this placement was to be a more reflexive professional. I looked back on what worked and what didn't work throughout my placement, and from this, I do believe I'm ready to teach, but not because I know everything, but because I understand that the next stage of my learning is by doing. This placement taught me that no teacher will get it right every class, every time, no matter what their experience is, and that further professional development will help me with thinking on my feet and being able to adjust my classes as I go. I can see that reporting and tracking is a high priority for schools, and I have a better understanding of why and how this can really impact a student's learning and therefore success in a school system. Thank you for listening to my final report. You can see the next page for my reference list.